Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our July webinar in the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub Expanded Horizons series, which is brought to you by Sturt University and supported by the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm meeting you on today, which is the Wagaya people, and I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which each of you are joining us today. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Indigenous Australians who may be present today. My name is Prue Cook. I'm from Nine Creeks Consulting, and I'm your webinar host across this series. In this webinar series, it's for those of us who work with farming and regional communities, from policy to the paddock, and it challenges us to think differently about how we approach engagement, extension and adoption in Southern New South Wales and across the broader country, particularly concerning drought resilience, ag tech and biosecurity. Through this series, we're exploring novel thinking and new ideas from different sectors, industries and countries to stimulate new approaches to collaboration and building rural resilience. Our guest for today is Dr. John James from Enablers of Change, and we're going to be talking about the exciting or controversial, depending on where you sit, ChatGPT and the implications that it might have on agricultural extension. If you've participated in one of these webinars before, and I've note today that we actually have quite a lot of people who haven't, this isn't about death by PowerPoint. John and I are going to have a conversation about his work, and we invite you to ask questions and share your own experiences at any time through the chat function. You're also going to be sent a recording of this webinar after it finishes, so if you need to leave early or you're having any technical issues, that's going to happen straight afterwards. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Prue. It's a delight to be here.
Perfect. And tell us a little bit about you, John, and the work that you do.
Sure, Prue. So after living in Queensland for many years, where I used to work for the Department of Agriculture there, I moved to Tassie 3 years ago. And that's when I set up my little consultancy called Enablers of Change. So I'm passionate about extension and helping others to improve their practices and techniques.
Excellent. And John, I think it feeds really nicely into our topic, which is obviously looking at new online technologies. But tell us a bit about your PhD.
Yes, okay. So I did that about 10 years ago. And funnily enough, it was looking at the use of new technologies. So back then, it was things like, webinars and e-surveys and exciting things like that. And it was looking at the factors that affect the adoption of those technologies. And Prue, I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I could summarize it all in a short statement to say it's all about the benefits. So it's what's in it for me, and that we just need to be really clear about that when we're looking at new technologies such as ChatGPT.
Perfect. And when you were doing your PhD 10 years ago, did you was this on your radar that would be at the point where something like AI would be doing what we're going to be discussing today?
No, because of course I would have asked ChatGPT to have written my PhD for me back then.
Excellent. And I think, yes, there's probably some people in the university sector who are very concerned about that statement.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so usually we kick off these sessions with a bit of a 101 of some basic terminology and concepts. Normally this is recognising that we often have some new extension practitioners in our midst, but we might have some experienced practitioners in our midst, and ChatGPT might be a pretty uncommon concept. So we'll start with the real obvious. What is it?
Sure. So ChatGPT is a really new shiny gadget. It's only been around like 6 months. It was released at the end of November last year. So, we're still within the first 12 months of this new technology. And as such, it's actually been one of the fastest growing consumer software applications ever. So it's really exciting to be involved with this, Prue. So ChatGPT, now I don't hear many people state this, but the GPT stands for the Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So in other words, it's all about words and generating words to help us with our work. So it's made by people called OpenAI. There's a free version, which is all that I use, but there's also a paid version, but it's about $20 US a month, and I haven't had the need to use that yet.
Excellent. So you've mentioned, predicting text, working with words. What can it do, and more importantly, what can't it do?
Okay. So it's really good at building sentences into, building words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, and then paragraphs into a story. And it was trained on a huge amount of printed material. So, Wikipedia, for starters, was one of the bases that was used. They uploaded lots of books and other things. And the trick to remember is that all happened back in like September 2021. So anything that we're looking at is, 18 months to 2 years old. So that's one of the restrictions of ChatGPT.
Recency. Excellent. Now, John, I'm going to ask you the next question, but I'm also going to ask the audience through a poll. Are you using ChatGPT in your work? And if so, how?
Sure. So as people are doing that, I'll just explain that I first used it back in January. So it had only been around a month or so, but it was for a fun thing. So it was my brother's birthday at the beginning of January. So I asked ChatGPT to write a poem for me. So I told it a little bit about my brother, some fun facts, and I asked it to do a rhyming poem for me, which it did, and remarkably well, in fact. But of course, when I did that, I sent it to him and said, look what my newfound friend ChatGPT has done.
Excellent. And so for your work now, how are you using it?
I now use it just about every day. So it helps me. So yeah, it helps me overcome the blank page problem. So if you give me something that someone has already written, I'm really good at editing it and further improving it. And so in the past, I'd stare at a blank page and not be very creative at writing. And so sometimes I'd do mind maps, I'd do bullet points and that sort of thing. Whereas now I feed into ChatGPT, hey, you need to be really specific. So I say, hey, write me a blog post about this particular thing. So I've used it for things like project applications. So where you're given explain how this will affect that or whatever. I say, ChatGPT, this is what I'm looking at. Provide an explanation of this. And then it comes back with words. And Prue, what I find is that ChatGPT is very much like an eager intern, but it's got an overactive imagination. So it wants to please us, and it's just guessing, what the next words will be. So it's very clever, but also very naive. So it really doesn't know everything, even though it sounds very convincing in the way that it states it to us.
Yeah, I do really like that analogy. So my business partner and I are doing a lot of work at thinking and using ChatGPT in our own work and thinking about the implications of it for agricultural extension. And that's exactly where it's like an intern that we're sort of training up, and it's got access to a lot of resources, but we've sort of got to train it to produce things in the way that we want them to, and we also need to use a fair bit of discernment in what they provide us initially. But we're also very happy to put that effort in because like the more that you use it and the more that you understand the prompts that you can give and what you've done previously, then the better the responses are that you get.
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect. I particularly, in some of my using of it as well too, I've really liked, I'm not a particularly visual thinker. And so I will say, here's some information. How would you represent this diagrammatically? And so that for me, like I, often will do documents and stuff where I need to present a diagram and I will spend ages going, oh, how does this fit? And what's the starting point? And so that's been a real game changer for me in cutting down. It's going, the other day I'm like, here's some information. How would you present this as a diagram? It's gone, it'd be a Venn diagram. And this is what should be in the overlapping circles. I tweaked the language a little bit, and that would have been a job that would have normally taken me hours and a lot of gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands. So, are you finding that you're mentioning that it's using, that you're using it every day as a time-saving mechanism? It's really useful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And often I'll know what I want and know that I'm not very good at it. So such as, writing promotional emails where we're trying to, promote the benefits and that sort of thing. So as an example, I'm helping organise the APEN conference, which is being held down here in Tassie at in the middle of November, so 14 to 16 November in Launceston. So I knew that I wanted something to send out to people to get them excited. So I said, ChatGPT, write a compelling argument, convincing people why they should be coming to the APEN conference. I provided it details, and then it came back and I saw it had like 6 good reasons. So I said, add 1 extra reason, which it did. And then I called that, 7 compelling reasons to attend the conference. So I think the analogy of an intern is good, that as long as we know what we're wanting, we can keep going back and asking the intern to do a little bit more work, tweak it, rewrite it, that sort of thing, to finally get to what it is that we're actually wanting.
Perfect. And just to check in on that poll too, John, we've got about half and half not using it, but then curious. We've got 1 person who's using it but not for work, and we've got the other about 50% are dabbling in it for work purposes. So we're sort of a bit of an even split today. So that's a good segue into how are you seeing other extension practitioners use it in their work?
Yeah. So here's the thing, Prue. I'm not. So I'm sure they are, but it's just one of those invisible technologies. So I'm thinking, so Prue, I can remember back when I was at school that I was there at the time that calculators were coming into existence, and there's a lot of hoo-ha, particularly with the teachers, that they were worried we were going to cheat during the exams by bringing out the calculator, that sort of thing. So back then you wouldn't have said, oh yeah, I'm going to use a calculator to do this. And I think it's a little bit like that now. That people might be using ChatGPT, but are just a bit hesitant to say that, oh yeah, ChatGPT either wrote my report or helped me get started writing that report.
And John, that's something that we've had a good discussion about in terms of preparing for today is, how transparent should we be in using ChatGPT? So we'll get into that a little bit further when we talk about industry perceptions. But just to wrap up on sort of what is it and how is it useful, ChatGPT is probably the product that most people have the greatest awareness of, but there's literally hundreds of similar products that are rapidly becoming available. What are some of the other products that are on your radar?
Okay, so often these days, if I'm needing to do some research on something that's current, as in the last 18 months, and particularly if it's a website, that sort of thing, I actually start with Bing AI, which is the Microsoft equivalent, because it has access to the internet. So it knows more than ChatGPT, but I find that that Bing AI isn't as fluent, shall we say. It's not as good at making those words flow. So sometimes I'll get Bing to do the initial research for me, and then I'll pass it over to ChatGPT and say, hey, write this in a more compelling, informal way that I can use for a blog post, for example.
You've got a team of interns.
That's right. And there's another one, Bard. So, Google have now joined the fray, but I haven't used Bard a lot. To me, it was quite clunky at the beginning. But I think, we haven't even reached the 1 year mark with these. I think we're going to see huge advances. And I think a lot of them will be, certainly upping their game.
Yeah, something that I've found personally that's been a bit of a game changer, again, recognizing, for me, sitting down and working out how to structure a presentation is quite challenging. And Canva's recently, well, I think it's recent, I've only just discovered it recently, a tool that, you put in a sentence about what your presentation's about and it will come up with a structure for you. And that for me, as someone who would, spend hours thinking about which template do I use and what's the structure and what do I put where, again, that's been something that I think was, really, really, really fantastic and has saved me, again, a hell of a lot of time. I'd like to move across to, let's talk about how we think ChatGPT is going to play out specifically in ag extension. And I want to start with the big question. In your opinion, is the tech a massive disruptor and is it a game changer, or is it just going to value add to what we're already doing?
Yeah, look, I've heard a lot of people, particularly educators, say it's going to be, a huge game changer and they're going to have to change the whole way they approach learning, particularly at universities, but also schools. But I actually think it's just going to be another tool in our toolbox, Prue. So just like the calculator, the sky didn't fall when they were released, and so it is with ChatGPT, that it's just going to be helping us with our work.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So what areas of ag extension or even R&D more broadly do you see tools like ChatGPT having the greatest positive influence?
I think it's particularly for those who are involved with communication. So communication and marketing, because it's so good at stringing words together, far better than what most of us can do. So, if we need to produce a fact sheet on something, that's where it'll be handy. But again, we have to make sure that we do the fact checking to make sure that the facts that it's putting in are in fact correct. But that's where I'd be feeding in the raw information that I'm after, and then asking ChatGPT or equivalent to massage that and produce a better flowing document. As I mentioned before, I use it for blog posts. It helps me get started with the enablers of change ones. But again, we have the caveat. So there was one that I did recently about one of the change models, and I knew who wrote it, and I just asked ChatGPT to write me a blog post about this and that. And then it came back and it actually attributed the wrong authors and the wrong dates. So I knew there was something wrong. So I had to come back and just be more specific and say, tell me about this particular change model, originally authored by these people on this date. And then it got it right.
Yeah, perfect. That's really interesting because both my partner and I've been working on respective projects where we've been analysing results from industry surveys or industry interviews. And so, we've sort of put that data together, because we were very close to the interviews, we sort of knew their contents, but we're helping, using ChatGPT to sort of help make sense of and, sort and find similarities and sort of pull all that together. And, there was in my partner's instance, it actually fabricated a quote and the interviewee completely. So we sort of had to go back and do a lot of that. And again, the one that I was doing the other day, it said, farmers were interested in this. And I'm like, any survey, and went back and said, how many farmers mentioned that? Oh, none of them did. I'm like, okay, that enthusiastic in turn is that you certainly, while, it's saving a lot of time, you certainly can't take it and push it out and go, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. There's a fair bit of work in there. If we can talk about, some things that a lot of us might have to do, like lit reviews, even, making sense of trial data, those kind of things. What do you think of its role there?
Yeah, so again, because we're providing the data or the raw details to it, I think it should work well. I think we're only going to be limited by our imagination. So, even simple things like writing emails. And again, I've read some articles by people who suffer from anxiety, and they've been asking ChatGPT to write an email to my boss to explain this or that, or why I was away sick yesterday, whereas many of us can easily overthink that, whereas ChatGPT just gets in and, it makes a start. And I encourage us all to double check what it does and make sure that it's got our, persona to it.
Yeah, perfect. And that's something, I've found I've had to do a little bit in terms of, prompts and teaching to get farmer-friendly language. I think it's kind of a little bit, it can be quite flowery, and the other day I had to do some social media for a roller disco, and it was great in terms of, it had emojis and this, flowery language that I just could never write. But in terms of getting, farmer-friendly language, I find that it and I have some, we have to go through stuff a couple of times to kind of, cut out some of the really big emotive, flowery stuff that just is going to have cut through.
Yes.
All right. Where don't you think we should be using it in extension? Are there any areas that you think that it's too unreliable or it's just not up to the task?
Yeah, so I think it's going to, like you mentioned, lit review before. Probably that's better for us to do as humans at the moment. So anything that's got highly factual material, I think, we should be doing the bulk of the work. But of course, we can then feed that through ChatGPT and say, check my grammar and spelling and sentence lengths to help make this material more readable and comprehensible. And like at the end of the day, we're all using Grammarly and spelling checkers anyway. So to me, this is just taking it the next step.
Yeah, Excellent. In your conversations and work, John, where's industry at with their willingness to use ChatGPT or accept, reports, material that's being generated by ChatGPT? Is there excitement, skepticism? Where are we sitting?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, Prue. I suspect that farmers tend to be more conservative than other members in the community, and I know that they put great faith in trusted sources of information. The best source is the farmer just across the fence, because you can see what he or she have been doing. So I'm not sure how well they will actually take to using it. Although maybe there's a difference between knowing that someone's created information for them using ChatGPT versus, the farmer using ChatGPT. Because I'm sure that there will be lots of instances where, instead of reading lots of different results of a Google search, that it's much easier to get ChatGPT to distill that information into, a short article that's much easier to understand. So
Yeah,
farmers who are doing their own research online and that sort of thing, I imagine that they'll be finding it very useful.
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions coming in, so we'll just jump on those. A question from Adrian is, will your content be shared with others using ChatGPT? So I'm presuming that's, Adrian, if I can paraphrase there, that ChatGPT will actually use the information that you provide it to better itself. Is that your interpretation of that question?
Yeah, I think so. And it also comes back to the confidentiality of information, that I know some consultants have been caught because they uploaded stuff and then, others in the business heard that. So I think if you read the fine print, that OpenAI, who own ChatGPT, they are keeping copies of everything that's been fed in so as to better train the AI behind it all. My understanding is that other people's searches won't be accessing that information though. But just be aware it has gone outside your organisation.
Yeah, perfect. And a question from Jess. She has a concern that in the increased use of AI programs, it removes a lot of authenticity. And given that extension is so human and community and people driven, extensionists are respected and we trust people. How do we overcome this?
Yeah, it comes back to the authenticity of our own voice, and which is, say there, Jess, is 100% true. And so that's when I use ChatGPT, I train it to speak more like I do. So I know some people have uploaded. So in my case, I've done 100 blog posts now. I could have fed those all into ChatGPT and say, read this and learn my style, and then you can ask it to name that as a style. So it might be JJ. So then the next time you do something, you say, use the JJ style to write a blog post about whatever it is. So it does actually, so it sounds more authentic because it speaks the same way that I do. And as an example of that, when I write blog posts, I don't like to say you, I like to say we, so that I'm part of the group who's needing to change. So instead of saying you should be doing this and that, I say, oh, we should be doing this and that. So, yeah.
I think, Jess, on your question, which is a really interesting one, I think at this stage, the thing with ChatGPT is there's still that human interface. So we're the ones using it and then taking that information and extending it, distributing it. So there's still that interface at this stage. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where that technology gets to.
That's right. Yes, and of course, that's where we come in as the final reviewer. That, it's our choice what we're putting out to the world. And I will always be changing what ChatGPT has suggested to me. Like, it's that over-eager intern again. I like to check the work. And in your case, Prue, you might have, deleted the dozen emoticons. And in my case, I'll add in some extra material and I'll often put in a little bit about Tassie or something like that.
I kept all the rainbows for the roller disco, but definitely removed them for my farmer communications. I think also on that as well too, some conversations that I've had is actually what ChatGPT does really well and where it's going to work is it helping with key messages. And I actually think that that's something that across extension we don't often do as well as we could. And I've recently made a suggestion in another project, is that we were reviewing a program, and some of the recommendations were, the time availability to produce something, and, the clearness of farmer messages was lacking in a particular product. And so we made a recommendation that, explore whether ChatGPT or similar product could help in this. And there was a lot of reluctance to go down that path. So, I think that's something to be mindful of. I remember listening to a podcast a while ago that was saying that, in terms of some AI medical, like an AI GP, is that in some instances the AI had better bedside manner than the actual GPs. So that human element is important, but yeah, in some instances, it's about understanding where it will and won't work.
That's right. And I'm just trying to think, Brew, that there's a phrase about that we know too much. It's the expert fallacy or something like that, that we know too much. Whereas if we only knew half as much, we'd be better explaining that to people. And I think that's where ChatGPT can come in and be that better interface between all that we know and what it is that the audience actually wants to know.
Now, Maria, I've seen your question, and I will ask that because I've actually got that question as well too. But I've just got a couple more that I want to ask before we get to the use of ChatGPT by farmers. So, John, what happens as an extension practitioner if we choose to ignore AI? Is it gonna make anyone redundant? Do we miss out?
Spoiler alert, no, I don't think so, Pro. I think it's just that we'll be using AI without actually realizing it. So in the same way, for those of us who watch Netflix, it's using AI to choose which movie it thinks that we're going to want to watch next. And same with, Facebook and Twitter, that's all using AI. So whether we know it or not, that's the world that we live in.
Perfect. A big concern, and going back to your comment about universities earlier, a big concern is that ChatGPT is going to remove our ability to think critically and increase the risk of incorrect information. What are your thoughts on that?
I can see pros and cons, but I'm thinking, it's like Wikipedia, that when it first came out, which was 10 years ago, again, people said the sky was going to fall and that it'd be full of inaccurate information, whereas in actual fact, research has been done that shows that Wikipedia is just as accurate as other paper-based encyclopedias, or when they existed anyway. So I think, ChatGPT will just be one of those tools that we use, and if anything, it's going to help us it'll improve the way we work, and by better using ChatGPT, we'll be able to improve our effectiveness and enable greater change.
I think since I've started using it, I felt like I've been able to accomplish more. So if I have writing tasks, and a lot of my job does involve writing anything from grants, reports, grower communications, it's a diversity, but I have to write in the morning. If I write in the afternoon, it's a pile of drivel, and I don't, I don't like it. And since using ChatGPT, I've at least been able to get a start on those jobs and create some structure and go, if I was going to produce this, what are the key bits of information I need and how would I structure it? And that sort of allowed me to hit the ground running the next morning and actually get in and do the writing, because I've done that thinking beforehand. Yeah. So it's allowing me to do more. And
I'm the same pro. So it really helps me kickstart my work, and it just gives me that head start. So if it would have taken me, say, 3 hours in the past to have written a 3 to 5 page article that I'm happy with, these days I probably could do it in maybe 30 minutes thanks to ChatGPT, because it puts 80% of the material there, and then it's a matter of my just going through and doing the editing and fine tuning. So it really does help me push out more material, and maybe at a higher quality, I'm not sure.
Excellent. Now, to get back to Maria's question, let's focus in on use by farmers. Is this something farmers will trust and want to use directly, or is it incumbent on us as extension practitioners to use it, check it, shape it, and then extend it?
I think everyone's going to be using it. So I'd be surprised if farmers aren't already using it, particularly, as I mentioned before, to summarise results of trials and that sort of thing. I think it's just going to be another tool in their toolkit that they'll use. And same for extension practitioners, that it's just going to help us be more effective with our work and, make better use of our time.
Yeah. And so I approached you to present on this webinar because obviously, I'm very excited and passionate about this space, but I was like, I need to bring a guest on with me, and so went and did a bit of a Google search, and you were the only person that came up in Australia with a blog post, which I'll actually share so that everyone can have a look at it. And so that was it. That was your post, a blog post about how we might use ChatGPT. In it, it mentioned the use of chatbots by farmers as a potential future use. And so, is that something that you feel is unlikely, that a farmer will be able to whip out their phone and be able to, ask for, recommendations or, assistance with management decisions? Is that something that you think there's a likelihood that they'll trust, or is that always going to be a people game where they're going to have a trusted advisor, consultant, someone that they can rely on?
I suspect that ChatGPT will just be another source of information that farmers use. So in the same way, often they're not going to just listen to the farm advisor who visited them yesterday. They'll be chatting with other farmers and other people. And I think, ChatGPT will just be another one to add to the fray.
Perfect. Now I want to dig into the transparency side of things now. And Nick has asked a really good question to kick that off. Are there any conventions about acknowledging that ChatGPT or AI was used in preparing a document or a resource?
No. In the same way, there are no conventions that you state that you used a calculator 20 years ago when you were, doing things, or, that you used Google search to help find material for a report that you were writing.
Or Grammarly to, edit your document for factual errors. I think that was interesting though, because you always disclose that you've used ChatGPT, don't you, John?
Yeah, so, well, certainly in that first blog post I did, for two reasons. One, I wanted to be transparent to say, hey, it wasn't me who wrote the bulk of this, but it was also to demonstrate that, hey, look what ChatGPT can do. So while I tweaked it, I didn't have to do a lot of tweaking. So I can't think of any examples, Prue, where I've seen other people say, acknowledgement to ChatGPT at the bottom of an article or something like that. Have you seen anything like that?
Well, we've provided an internal report recently on a review of a project, and indicated that we used ChatGPT and how we used it, and we're really explicit in how we used it, because I think you're going to come up against this, level of, is there a level of trust in ChatGPT? And I think if you just said, and this report was generated by ChatGPT, you'd automatically, get some red flags thrown up. But I think we were sort of explicit in saying we used it to help synthesize data, and draw conclusions and look for similar themes, So I think we were quite explicit. I certainly wouldn't say, we use ChatGPT to help write this grant. I don't think, I think it's going to be horses for courses. But I think if you are disclosing that you've used it, you definitely need to be explicit in how, and make sure that you've mentioned that there's still been editing, there's still been thorough, because I think that's where people are going to get in trouble if they use it and throw it out quickly without putting over that overlay of personal knowledge.
Yes.
And I've got a quick poll question that I can pop up as well too on other people's thoughts about whether we should disclose it for transparency, because I think that's interesting to get other people's perceptions on this. Now, a couple more questions that have popped in from Bronwyn. Can you forward program ChatGPT to produce material in advance? So I think that means, can you say, hey, in a week? So Bronwyn, if I can paraphrase that, in a week's time, I would like an article on a particular topics. I think you sort of need to be using it.
The question, no, it's all immediate. So it's like it's a live intern who's sharing the office with you. You turn to them and talk. You can't pre-allocate questions as such.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying, Bronwyn. Yep, we're on the right track there. And Matt has another one. I use BARD as a tool, knowing to critically analyse the information produced. Yeah. However, when marking university assignments, it is very evident uni students are not critically analysing the info, merely copy and paste. Copy and paste has been around for a while, but at least journal papers are generally true information. How do we educate future generations on the need to dig deeper, or do we have to just wait for better regulation on AI to ensure proper referencing and correct info produced?
So I heard an interesting story from an academic who was using ChatGPT early on and was aware that their students were. So they set the assignment, and it was basically, here's the material that ChatGPT has written on, I don't know, Shakespeare or something. Critically analyse it, knowing that ChatGPT wrote this, and come back and point out, flaws and that sort of thing, or things that it particularly got right. So it helped those students to firstly appreciate that ChatGPT does have that overactive imagination, and it helped them to be more analytical themselves. And they needed to know, the life of Shakespeare so as to do the fact checking. So I thought that was a clever way of using it. And of course, there are lots of other AI tools now where you can feed in material and find out what the percentage likelihood is that ChatGPT or Bing or Bard or whoever wrote that material.
Excellent. And Matt, I'm thinking back to my university time as well too, and that, some fellow students who might have been copy and pasting from other sources, not necessarily ChatGPT, but that copy and pasting by students and not critically analysing at the time, I don't think is just something that's come out because of ChatGPT. It's probably getting easier as a consequence. But yeah, I certainly remember a couple of my fellow students getting a rap over the knuckles for being a bit liberal with the copy and pasting quite a few years ago now that I was at uni. So I think it's probably incumbent on us when we get, when we're helping, new extension practitioners, is to, help them navigate that critical thinking. All right. So, John, let's move into the practical side of things. We always finish up these webinars with a focus on what can we do in practice that will help us get the most out of tools or improve what we're doing. So, practical advice for those wanting to use ChatGPT: the art of getting the most out of it is creating a great prompt and essentially training it. So how did you get started, and what were some of your first learnings when using ChatGPT?
So the example I gave earlier was actually, that birthday greeting for my brother. So I'd encourage people to start with low risk activities and learn how to use the tool and what it does and what it can't do through those low risk activities, and then build up over time to the more risky activities, such as social media posts or something like that, where you could get a bit of backlash. Yeah.
Excellent. And so, what did you have any initial frustrations, and how have you managed those going forward?
Yeah. So it was obvious to me from the beginning that ChatGPT and Bard and all the others are trained on American spelling. So for an Aussie, I got frustrated with the number of Z's instead of S's and that sort of thing. But I quickly learnt all I had to say was rewrite using UK English, and then it came back in the right format. So, it took another 5 seconds for it to do that, but it was me learning to know what to ask. The other example for me is that, as I mentioned before, I like inclusive pronouns. So, we and us, as opposed to you and they. So again, I just tell it to use those when that's what I'm looking for.
Perfect. And I think, one of my early frustrations was certainly around sort of getting that language right. And for me, overcoming that was really realizing I need to be quite explicit and actually sitting down and really thinking about what it is that I'm actually wanting. And so that actually requires like a fair bit of thinking to go, well, what's the outcome that I'm looking for? Who is the target audience? Like really doing that, thinking about the target audience. If you want the best outcome, you've got to do that thinking, and that gives you good extension outcomes, regardless of whether you're asking ChatGPT or designing by any other mechanism.
That's right. That's why I reckon we're not going to be put out of work by ChatGPT anytime soon, because we're the ones that are driving it. We know best what it is that we want. Yeah.
Excellent. So now, given you've been using it for the long time that it's been available, but several months now, you're early adopter. How do you now design prompts that elicit accurate and relevant information?
Yeah. So I like to set the context so that I say whether it's a poem or a blog post. I specify the target audience, so I could say farmer, or I could be more specific and say wheat farmer in Southern Australia. And so that's what I've learned, Pros, to be more specific with the prompts and to then keep asking and tweaking until I'm happy with the response. So it'll sometimes take half a dozen times to get the final material that I'm actually after.
Yeah, I do a lot of regenerating, because it'll give you something and you'll go, and I mean, the other thing that I liked is that, I don't like that. Then I've got to articulate why I don't like it.
That's right. Yes.
So it still makes me think a lot. And that's certainly, again, something that I found early with using it found early on with using it, is that you've really got to nail that prompt. But I've also found that if I've got to a point where it's not, like we're at a bit of a stalemate and it's not quite getting me where I want it, I will say, how would I design a prompt that gets you to give me X? And then that actually helps us get to a good place. So I can actually ask it to give me the prompts that I can give it to help it better. Like it's getting a bit meta, but you say, we're not getting to a good place here. What can I ask you to get the result that I'm asking? And it'll usually give you a prompt that helps move you along. So it's good.
Yes, it's good. And the other thing to remember is that, ChatGPT isn't all-knowing. So if I were writing an article about, say, Margate, there's actually a Margate here just to the south of Hobart. There's a Margate in Queensland. There's a Margate in England. We need to be more specific about which Margate we're talking about if we're wanting ChatGPT to write something about whatever.
Excellent. And so that's a really good. And so the next one was my first, concern when I was thinking about ChatGPT, and particularly its use in ag extension, is the nuance of place, sector. That a lot of the stuff that we do is small and localized, and you've got geographic constraints and sectoral issues. So I was, quite concerned that it wouldn't get that nuance. So have you got any advice on specific techniques for designing prompts that help with that location-specific advice and respond appropriately to ag-specific terminology?
So I'll share with you that the first thing is that extension doesn't work very well because there's so many, is an extension lead, yes, and all the other uses of extension apart from agricultural extension. So sometimes it's better to say farm advisor or agricultural consultant. And it's about being specific and keep trying if something doesn't work. And so I'm a bit like you, Pro. So I've found some phrases or sentences of commands that I now just copy and paste because it worked last time. So that helps me remember what works as well.
Yeah. And I was seeing the other day, that there's an AI product that just designs prompts for ChatGPT. And then I was chatting about that with my partner. He's like, well, ChatGPT does that itself anyway. So, all right. I want to recap with a quick list of, your do's and your don'ts when using ChatGPT, and any quick, quick wins that you can share with our audience today.
Yeah, sure, Pro. So I think the number one thing to remember is that it is like that enthusiastic intern who's got an overactive imagination, and that we need to be guiding them with what it is that we're actually wanting as the final result. So we've got to be really clear what it is that we're looking for. And so we can specify the word length, the level of formality, use of pronouns, things like that. And it's good to provide the context at the beginning. So that's where we can say, Australian farmers, or whatever it is that we're writing about. So to help the AI better understand the target audience that we're referring to. And the more specific we can be, the better it is. And don't be afraid to try more than once to poke ChatGPT to do what it is that you're wanting. And then my final advice is always fact check the final material. You've got to read it through and make sure it's spot on.
That's really important point too. I mean, the fact checking is absolutely critical, but also that continue, because I think that was my, when I first tried using ChatGPT, I had a lot going on and, tried it a few times, like, well, that isn't what I want. And then now I've sort of realized that, it's a continuous process. So you sort of got to take that time to kind of train it. And I now have, a series of different chats that are aligned to the different work that I'm doing at the time. So, for example, for promo for these webinars, they're all in a thread. So I'll go back and say, here is the style of writing that I want. And, like you said, JJ style, it's Prue style. And say, please produce in Prue style some details using, these key questions. And that sort of helps me out. Another really quick thing that has just saved me recently as well too is asking ChatGPT to convert information into a table as well too. And it will just automatically do that. So that for me has been a real winner. So if anyone else who is using it has got some really cool, just quick stuff that you can that you'd like to share, give away your secrets, feel free to pop them in the chat. All right, John, final question, and then we can go to some Q&A if there's any more, but we've already had some great questions today. We recognise that this tech is in its infancy. Any predictions on where we're going to be in 5 years' time?
Yeah, look, so I mentioned before, we're not even at the 12-month mark yet, so I think it's going to be amazing to see what does happen in 5 years. But if I, using that calculator analogy again, the calculators have developed so much over time to the extent that, well, I was looking for a calculator to use as an example during this period, but I no longer have one because I use my phone. So, it's built in. So I suspect that's how ChatGPT and these other AI tools will be, that they're there, they'll just be everywhere, and they'll just be doing so much more. So, if it's text at the moment, soon it's pictures. So I edit my own website, and I noticed that one of the developers there, one of the plugins, I can now describe the picture that I would like it to generate for me. And that's now, potentially saving me finding photos to add to the website. It's going to create them for me. And I think, video will be the next thing, that instead of just writing the words, it might, develop videos with voiceovers, and then it'll do them in a dozen different languages.
Perfect. Now, John, so now's the opportunity for anyone in the audience. If you've got any remaining questions, please pop them in now. We can have a discussion about them. Normally at this stage in the webinar, we have a bit of a show and tell about where people can go for books, podcasts, resources, etc., that they can learn more, because we recognise that an hour webinar is nowhere near enough to make anyone an expert on anything. But when we were chatting about this the other day, John, we sort of discussed that really the best thing that you can do is start an account and have a little bit of a play. It was probably the best way to do it. We've shared John's blog post with you, but really it's going to, the applications are so broad that, having a think about how it applies to your work and getting it and having a play is probably the best way to learn more.
It is. So there's no books, very few articles. There's some news posts and things like that, but there's just, it is so fresh. That there was nothing that I could easily compile. Sorry, Prue.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So Bronwyn said, can she ask ChatGPT to write my newsletter in John style or Prue style? No, sorry, Bronwyn. That's going to be unique. You need to establish what that style looks like yourself.
Yep.
So that will be you going, hey, here's something that I've written previously. I want you to look at the format, length, structure, and tone. And I want you to remember this as Prue style. And then I'm going to give you some additional information. I want you to incorporate that information into a similar article or whatever using Prue style would be the type of prompt that you would give with any additional clarifications around audience. Okay, so I've got one last poll question, which is how are you feeling about ChatGPT now at the end of the session? And I just thinking, I do see some interesting videos in my social media feeds around uses of ChatGPT. So I obviously started going, this is going to be great for work, but found one the other day, which was around someone who was saying, oh, you know, I've got these things in my fridge that I need to use up. What's a recipe that uses them? That's been an absolute game changer for me as well. So putting down on food waste as well as giving me more time at work. All right. Give anyone the option for any last questions. John, any last comments from you?
No, but I suspect this won't be the only new technology that we see in the next 12 months. There'll be other things that are coming along. And so I just encourage everyone to, to try them out, again, in the low risk situations and see what they do and how they might be able to help us.
Perfect. John, thank you so much. This has been a very enjoyable conversation. I love talking about new tech. So thank you for your time today. And thank you very much to our audience for joining in. You've asked some really great questions. I hope that this has stimulated your thinking. And if you're planning on doing something different as a consequence of today's information, we'd love to hear it in the comments. I've popped up the registration for our August webinar on the screen now. Our guest is going to be Pete Fitzgerald from the University of New England, and we're going to be talking to Pete about the Decide and Thrive project that he's working on, which is exploring how understanding producer mindsets can enhance the development of livestock ranking systems, extension activities, and tool development. So given that, behavioural science and how behaviour influences our adoption has been a topic that we've visited numerous times in this webinar, this is going to be a really great practical case study looking at how that can be applied in helping livestock producers build their drought resilience. Once this webinar finishes, you're going to be directed to a survey link. It would be very much appreciated if you could please fill it out. It doesn't take any more than a minute to complete, and your input's really important. If you have any suggestions on future presenters, projects, or topics that you would like, I do look at those survey results very heavily in guiding future webinar topics. So, if you've got something that you want to learn about, any burning questions, pop them in there and I will see what I can do. So thank you again for participating in today's Expanded Horizons webinar delivered by the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. Please enjoy the rest of your day.